Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dr. Shamian Caballero, Director of the Mixed Museum. And on behalf of the Mixed Museum, I'm delighted to be chairing this evening's panel event, which is a discussion of the history and life experiences behind the Mixed Museum's latest digital output, our SussedBlackWoman digital resource, sharing the life and work of Sue Andy in her own words. I'm joined tonight by an absolutely wonderful panel of speakers. With us, we have Phil Mullen, who is Assistant Professor of Black Studies at Trinity College Dublin and a trustee of the Association of Mixed Race Irish. And Phil's research examines the experiences of Africans and people of mixed African descent in Ireland through various academic lenses. We also have Michael Hajaru, who has an honorary doctorate from the Open University and is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a Senior Fellow of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. Michael is also the project director of the John Blank Project, which celebrates the Black trumpeter to the courts of Henry VII and Henry VIII. James Mayer is a music producer, songwriter, and podcaster. James first gained recognition as a songwriter and member of the multicultural Manchester band Kid British. James is also the founder of the immersive Life is Sound Soundbath platform and a host of the Life is Sound podcast. We also have Dr. Paris Carmichael Murphy, who is a lecturer in equity, diversity and inclusion and a race equity consultant for research and evaluation. Paris was awarded a PhD in education at the University of Manchester and is a member of the Feminist Review editorial collective. She has developed 2 hidden histories resources, Black in Psychology and Black in Manchester. And also with us tonight is Miranda Mercado Gregory from the Mixed Museum, who will be helping us out behind the scenes with some web tech. Thank you, Miranda. So after I've given you some background to the resource, we'll hear from the panelists for about 30 minutes, after which the panel will be joined in conversation by Sue Andy, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. Some of these we've received in advance, but for those here today, you can also type these into the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to get through as many of those as we can before we end at 8:30. And I do hope some of you will have had the chance to explore the resource. But for those who haven't, I thought it might be helpful to give you some insight into why I have been so keen for the Mixed Museum to house an archive on Sue Andy's life and work, and why this archive has taken the form that it has. So I was first introduced to the work of Sue Andy through Professor Deirdre Osborne, who, knowing my interest in Britain's mixed race history, asked me if I knew Sue Andy's monodrama, The Story of M, and shamefully I did not. So when I finally did read M, I was completely blown away and also grateful that someone had so beautifully, so insightfully captured the nuances and complexities of 20th century working class mixed race families. And despite the usually negative public attention these families repeatedly experienced during the 20th century, and of course earlier, their histories are also paradoxically unfamiliar to many. And where they are known, they have often frequently been misunderstood, with stereotypes and assumptions overshadowing realities and intricacies. So it was wonderful to see this history presented with such honesty, care, and love. So the news in 2018 that Professor Osborne had managed to have The Story of M added to the edXL English A-level curriculum was very welcomed. However, it also became clear that there were still likely barriers to young people being able to study this incredible work. And while there are many excellent scholarly resources written by academics on Sue Andy's work, less available is material that might help students and teachers in particular understand the social and historical context of racial mixing behind the story of M, particularly in relation to Manchester. And without this context, I worried that pupils and their teachers may lack the confidence to choose to study the story of M. So in 2018, we included a brief entry about Sue Andy and the story of M as part of our Association of Mixed Race Irish Families in Britain exhibition, but we were aware that this only skimmed the surface. And so the idea of the SussedBlackWoman project was born. In 2022, the Mixed Museum and Sue Andy were awarded a grant by the Association of Independent Museums and the National Lottery Heritage Fund through their New Stories, New Audiences scheme to collaborate on the creation of the SussedBlackWoman digital resource. And this funding has allowed us to work with Sue Andy to explore her personal archive, and presented in a way that we hope will speak to young people and their educators, as well as a general audience. And in this, we have been ably assisted by conversations and workshops with young people and creatives in the Northwest. And here we must thank Dr. Marie Malloy of the Manchester Metropolitan University and creatives Faith Babington and Kevin Edward Turner, who helped us set up and run these workshops. So the resource is made up of 9 chapters written by Suandi that can be read all the way through or dipped in and out of. At the end of the resource, we are delighted to also share the outputs of our wonderful Gen Z workshop participants who have inspired us with their own conversations and reflections along the way. And also, we have a wonderful further reading list generously provided to us by Professor Osborne. We hope the resource will be of use to those who study Suandi's work and those who just wish to know more about the themes that the resource covers. We have only been live for a week, but already we are so moved and touched by the responses that are coming in, telling us that the resource is already making a significant contribution to preserving a part of Britain's working class, mixed race, northern history. And before we open up to our panel, I'd like to finish with a reflection on preserving and accessing what seems to have become known as marginalised histories. One of the reasons the Mixed Museum was created was to show the complexity and diversity of Black and Asian histories in Britain, of which racial mixing is a part. And this history is not actually that hard to find in some ways, as the Black and Brown presence is actually quite well documented. However, it is fragmented, and importantly, it is mostly documented by outsiders. So what is challenging is finding material that helps us tell the history from insider perspectives rather than the external gaze. And as we worked with the young people in this project, what became clear to us is how much they valued hearing Suandi's voice. And so we made the decision not to create the more formal, removed type of exhibition we are all more used to, but to create this resource, as we call it, in the first person. It is told from Suandi's point of view, and it is told in Suandi's voice. At times, literally, we have sprinkled audio of her storytelling throughout it. And I think for me, that is the most powerful thing about what we have created, is that it gives the power over to the person whose life and work we are attempting to preserve. Yes, there are and will be gaps. Yes, there are and will be omissions. Some of these are down to memory and space, but some are deliberate. Some are down to preferences and sensitivities. But there are also gaps and omissions in official archives, and often the reasons for these are much less transparent and often much more damaging to the historical picture. So we hope that by centering Suandi's voice in the resource, we also help challenge the idea of how we present what we preserve and how we can possibly think more creatively about the concept of exhibitions, archives, and museums. So we might pick up on some of these things as the conversation unfolds, but for now, I'd like to start handing over to our panelists. Suandi, as she herself will no doubt tell you later, is very clear that the resource is both about her and not about her. It is both her life story and a wider story. So tonight we have tried to structure the discussion to reflect this. And as such, we've asked our panelists to explore the resource in advance and pull out something from it that resonates with them or their own work, and then to reflect on this, and then we'll have a brief discussion with the other panelists before we move on to the next speaker. After we've heard from all our panelists and had a general discussion amongst us, we will then be joined by Suandi, who will join us in conversation before we open up to questions from the audience. So that's the structure of tonight. And we're going to start with Phil and ask Phil if she'll speak to us about her reflections on the resource and what has spoken to her and what she's pulled out of it. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you so much, Charmy. I really want to begin by thanking you for inviting me to be part of this really amazing and significant event this evening, and to actually honour the work of Suandi and the path that she has taken, the journey she's taken. I suppose one of the things that really touched me from reading Suandi's work and looking at her photos and her story was the part where she talks about the scarcity of photos and the scarcity of photographs of family and the sentimentality attached actually to the view that remain. And this kind of highlighted the importance of preserving memories, and how these, help us to fight against the systemic erasure and neglect of us as a community, a mixed race community. And also I thought looking at the photograph of Sue Andy and her mother together really, really resonated with me, because I have virtually no photographs of me with my own mother. Having grown up in an institution, there weren't that many opportunities to have photographs. And Sue Andy's story that she tells of hugging her mother and loving to hug her mother in public really surprised me, because I would never have dreamed of hugging my mother. I had huge issues with the fact that my mother was white, which is interesting. Having that proximity to whiteness embarrassed me as a child. And so I found Sue Andy's story there really, really interesting. And I suppose in a way it comes from the fact that I grew up in an institution, so therefore having investigated this through my own work, the concept of family, of mother, of father, was to a greater or lesser degree kind of alien to many of us who grew up in these institutions. So having a parent that shows you where you belong in a world that tells you maybe you don't belong, or tries to create a space to say this is the space that you must inhabit, or this is the space where you belong. Having a parent that does that, I suppose, made a huge difference to Sue Andy. And I really love this photo, because photos bring us back to memories, often that we've forgotten. They encapsulate a moment, again, a moment that we may have forgotten. And I think they are full of emotion and perspective in a way. I suppose that Sue Andy's poetry is also captures a moment in time and can bring us back in time as well. And so I think this concept of the photograph in the resource really, really worked for me and brought me back. I think even just the black and white, the clothes her mother was wearing, these are the type of women that I grew up with in Ireland as well. And so it really pulls you back in time, and it reminds you of who you were, not who you are. And the importance of that, the formation of you at that period of time, and that these women had such influence and often were very down-to-earth working class women. So even as an academic, I hear the voices of common sense, working class common sense, which comes through often much more than maybe the so-called, elite academic intelligentsia voice that we are meant to, espouse. I often hear, my mother used to talk about my father and say, he may be smart, but he has no common sense. So I think often when I looked at this photo and the idea that Sue Andy loved to hug her mother, it really had an impact on me, because I just couldn't see how that could be. And the idea that she might have loved her mother in a way was very, very different to our experience, our ability to ever hug mothers, and many of the women that I grew up with in my research never knew their mothers, so I think this was a really powerful, for me, it was a very powerful part of the resource, and a very powerful kind of reminder of how race and boundaries can be, overcome or can be traversed through love. So yeah, that was my kind of biggest takeaway. I loved Sue Andy's poetry, because like the photography, it also captures a moment, like I said. So yeah, thank you, Charmy. And I'm going to be strict on myself. I've set my timer, so.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Before I open it up to the rest of the panelists to comment, I would just like to say your point about photographs is so pertinent. And I think one of the things that we really struggle with at the Mixed Museum is often trying to source photographs, particularly of ordinary life, because it's often that which is missing. And in the gap of ordinariness, then this idea of exotic and different starts to seep in. So also, like you, I found this rich archive of family photos at a time. Often when we are thinking about this time period, the way it's presented to us is often not people who look like us, the people who are here and the panel today. So it's really powerful to see these images and to see these parental relationships and to see this ordinariness. So thank you for speaking to that. It's a really, really great point. Would anyone else like to come in here around that?
No, can I just say about the mum? I'm going to talk about it again. I'm going to steal some of my time. She made me realize how central our mum is to us, art to us. They physically created us, but they gave us the confidence to be who we are. That's so important. That I think that came across so strongly for me. So I feel that resonated me. And that picture is very poignant, because we've got a family picture, and it's black and white, but it speaks so powerfully because there's so few images, so few, and we take thousands of pictures almost willy-nilly, but those few pictures are so special. No, that really came across, and it spoke to me too.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I wonder if I could just ask you, James, as a younger member of the group, if I may say so, what has been your reaction to seeing the pictures that are in the resource from this time period? Oh, if you could just unmute yourself, sorry.
That would help. These pictures remind me of pictures of my grandparents, where it's the nostalgia, it's thinking about that time and the lives lived of the people within those images and what they would have gone through in a societal kind of commentary towards how they looked. And, having a white mother, Suandi being mixed race at that time, there's a whole backstory there of what the experience would have been, which has led her to her work now. So when I see these pictures, it does remind me of personal family stories and what people would have gone through at those times.
Thank you. And Paris, if I could just call on you, because I know later you'll be speaking to us a little bit about education, but I wonder if I could ask, from your perspective, the work that you've done with young people, going back to Phil's point about the power of the photograph, where does that sit in terms of your work and in terms of the understanding of the young people you deal with?
I think, I'm not sure if it even directly answers your question, but I think that the biggest thing that stands out to me is, I think somewhere alongside this picture, Suandi said that her mother wouldn't have liked this picture or this picture to be shared. And I'm not sure where the link is there, but I'm also thinking about people relating to that, people today take photos and want the best one to be shown and the best one to be part of how they're remembered. And I guess through this image, Suandi's mum didn't have that choice. This is the image we've got, and this is the image we're talking about, and that Suandi's celebrating. So maybe younger people might relate to that aspect of how you feel when your image is being shared.
And it's a really important point, I think, in that archival work and also presenting the images that we have, particularly if the person is not there to give permission. In some of the other work that we're doing at the Mixed Museum, this does come up around when we only have one image and it's so significant, but also particularly if we have concerns around, would my family member want me to use this and use this in the way that I'm doing? What's the balance within that? And it's something we've talked about and putting this together. And so Suandi does speak to that around this photo. But it's, filling those gaps is hard in the scarcity of imagery, as you say, Phil.
Yeah, sorry. And I think, again, in my own work, this debate around archival material and who has the right to use it, and that a lot of the material has been created without the subject or the object of it having been asked permission. There's no informed consent on using a lot of archival material. And this is very strong around letters, personal letters and personal papers. So understand it. But I suppose a photo like this, if it's treasured by Sue Andy, then it takes on a completely different meaning to me than the meaning that maybe a stranger is ascribing to us, you know, in terms of what the mother might have felt, or because it's Sue Andy's photo of her with her mother. And if there's a scarcity of these photos, then how do you represent that relationship, you know, in through the visual image? And like, we have lots of images of Sue Andy. I have only, I think, 4 photographs of myself with my mother over a lifetime. She was 92 when she died, you know, but as a child, I have 1 photo as a baby, and 1 photo as a teenager, and maybe 1 or 2 others as a young person. So I understand that, you know, her mother might have had some issues because of whatever she would have felt about how she looked in the photo. But I think we can try to transcend that in terms of the interpretation for Sue Andy. It's a photo of love, the proximity even of the 2 bodies together, you know, the closeness of the 2 together, the fact that she talks about how much she loved to hug her mother in public. You know, for me, it took on a completely different meaning. And again, coming from somebody who grew up in an institution, you know, and has researched people who grew up in institutions where they had no mother and only found their mothers after they were dead, and discovered that their mothers had never told anybody they existed. I think, yeah, it takes on a completely different meaning for me, and maybe it's a generational thing. And I understand that, you know, photos like this, there's also intergenerational trauma, you know, that often needs to be healed and reconciled as well. And Sue Andy speaks in the resource about how difficult she became, you know, herself as a teenager. And I think that's really interesting. But this seems to be a moment that has been captured on photo where Sue Andy's smiling, her mother's smiling. There's some kind of détente there between the 2 of them, you know. And to me, I found this a very beautiful photograph, you know, from the perspective of the child. Yeah. Possibly not from the perspective of the mother, but from the perspective of the child. Yeah. And I don't imagine that Sue Andy would have put it in to the resource in any way to devalue her mother, but to simply remark on the relationship and the closeness, the physical closeness, and that she underpins this with that story of wanting to always loving to hug her mother in public. So I guess this is, you know, this is what resonated with me in terms of this particular image. And I loved all of her other images, particularly the modeling images. You know, that was my period of growing up as well. So looking at the clothes, and her clothes and how modern Sue Andy looks in those clothes really is in kind of contradiction to how her mother looks. You know, she's so stylish, so smart, you know, she's very up to the minute with fashion and that. And so there is this juxtaposition of the 2 women as they're going through their lives and what they're experiencing. And there's the hardship for her mother. I think that comes across in the photograph. You know, there's a hardship that she has experienced and a journey that she has taken in terms of having 2 mixed race children, in terms of people spitting on her, you know, when they looked in the pram. I mean, this is something that you don't really ever forget. And again, when I see that photo and I see all of that, and the whole resource to me is surrounded, it's kind of scaffold, this photograph is scaffolded by all of that other information that's in there, because these are the years that really inform who we are, you know, and our relationships. So I'll leave there, yeah.
That's wonderful, wonderful insight. I think we'll loop around to some of that, and potentially in Michael, if we can ask you to speak next, because I think you will be speaking a little bit to womanhood, motherhood?
Certainly, definitely. Now let me share my screen. Let me go here. Let me go there. I'd just like to kick off by saying I think this is a brilliant site. It's innovative, flexible, it's accessible, and it's dynamic. And it's just it's really a modern site. And she's really opened herself up here, really brilliant. And in some ways, she's redefined archival presentation on the net. And the thing I particularly like about the kind of the sound and text bites, there's no huge bits of text. There's all little bites that you can take, and that's great for guys like me whose eye can't. As my dad would say, your hand can't steady, your eye can't steady. You're always looking around. No, it's a great resource. So there's three things I want to talk to about Sue Andy and this site. The first is something that I've been studying for the last couple of years now: Black women in art and how they've been actively eliminated. And that brings you in terms of Black women in society. If you look at what, what happened then? Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. I was in full flight and it all went wrong. Oh my goodness. Let me just share that. Sorry about that. I was in yeah, okay, there we go. What Malcolm X said about Black women: the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman, unprotected, and that really spoke to me because this is a revelation for me personally. Because I had a strong mother, I'd always thought women are strong, and the fact that they were strong in spite of what they went through. And when you look at what the reality of that, look how the America treats Kamala Harris here, in terms of, who's the worst vice president in recent years. And by a country mile, 40% of them believe that Kamala Harris is the worst. Pence gets 17%. And we bring it closer to home, our own Diane Abbott, the way she's been treated. When that Tory donor said he saw and he wanted to shoot Black women, and she tried 46 times to stand up and speak for herself in the House of Commons, and they wouldn't let her speak. 46 times. And they say that the Speaker of the House didn't let her speak, but he didn't let her speak because the Labour Party leader, Steimer, said he didn't want Diane to speak. This is today. Black women are being disrespected, and Diana has got such a record, and she's disrespected. So that's what. If I turn it around and look at Sue Andy, total respect in terms of she is a Black woman who knows who she is and and knows how to present herself and relate to people as who she is, and being a strong Black woman, really important and a great role model. Now, I'm going to say, I don't like Diane Abbott. I don't agree with everything she says, but I totally respect who she is, and this website reflects that fact that she's not ashamed to say who she is and what she does. So it's really important to me, really important indeed. We move on. The second thing was the story of M. I saw the play in Greenwich a couple of years ago, and it was just stunning. And you get a sense of it in the web, but I've got to admit, the web's good. It gives you some of the backstory, but to see it live, there's nothing for it. So I had to see it because it spoke to me about my mum, and your mum being so proud of you. When you're young, you don't really fully realize it. You always got you clean, everything's made for you. You've got a breakfast before you go to school. You're loved and cared for, and in my case, and so in this case, protected from all the things from the world and its aggression. In fact, in preparation for this, I phoned my sister, because I've got this thing about Liverpool 8. I'm going to get credit, but very briefly, Liverpool 8 was a little bubble where you had multiculturalism in the 60s, and there was no racism there because we were the same. We were all Black, Poles, Ugandans, Jamaicans, all that beautiful, just in Liverpool. It's a brilliant place. And that's where I grew up, and I had a mum who protected me and looked after me. So I had a great childhood, and Sue Andy's spoke to me. And particularly when she talked about her mum in decline in the Alzheimer's, that really was moving, because my mum had exactly the same story. So that touched me. So I don't want to go on about that, but I found that's a very emotional story that that really spoke to me. But what I was really excited about, I think this is really important, because I've worked with a lot of artists, and a big statement, artists could do more to engage children with their practice. And that's what Suandi's done through this site. She's given people the opportunity, giving young people the opportunity to engage with themselves, which is so important. Because many of our young people today they often take their ideas of themselves from outside rather than inside, who they are, be the first of them. And this is what Suandi gives them, the tools, the ideas, and the thinking, that confidence verging on arrogance, to be themselves. Which in a world, particularly black people and young black boys in particular, the world has an ideal of you. This is Suandi can say, you can be you. And you can speak to the world on your terms, and that's what she does here. So that's why I've got total respect for her and this site, telling that story and making it accessible, useful. So no, brilliant, well done.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. And on that, some of the points you made, I think, really will go very well into James's reflections next. Of all of us here today, it's James is actually in the resource. And this is part of where he appears in the section, the chapter, The Boys, which is Suandi talking to men of mixed African heritage about growing up in Manchester. So, James, I wonder if I can hand over to you now to talk us a little bit through your reflections.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say this is incredible, and like really grateful to be here and be included in this. I wanted to touch a little bit on meeting Suandi, and not just her work kind of here within this resource, but who she is as a person and how we met. And I would say the inclusion of me feeling seen. So my identity as a mixed race person has always been quite a confusing experience for me. You know, on the outside, people will just see that I look white. So I've always gone along with that narrative. As for society, it's the easiest thing to say, you know, hearing stories from my dad as a mixed race person, his experiences coming from my granddad. I was taught a lot about that from a very early age, but my life was very different. I wasn't really experiencing the same things as my dad was. So I never really took on that identity of a mixed race person. When I met Suandi and I realized the work that she did and we got chatting, she was the first person that ever referred to me as a person of color, and it really took me back. And from that moment, I kind of went on a journey of repeating that in my head of, wow, I had so much respect for her just because she's in the arts. I'm a musician, you know, she's a poet, she's a writer. I also write music and lyrics, so there was a connection there. But when she kind of gave me that phrase that stuck in my mind, I went on a journey of, it's been about 10 years since I met Suandi now, of really starting to get to grips and be comfortable identifying as that and speaking it out to people as well. So Suandi's consistently added me into her work, and I feel really privileged because it's not just about the work that reaches people, which is, you know, shaping minds and changing perceptions and giving people history and knowledge. Suandi's work is also face-to-face, person-to-person. She's changed my perception in my life about myself and my journey. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on that before I spoke about this, because she's been a character in my life, a true teacher, and I think those people show up in your life for a reason. I'm a big believer in that. And I'm super grateful for it. It's been a great journey, a lot of learning, meeting Suandi and the journeys that she's taken me on with when we did Strength of Our Mothers. So she documented my grandma's story as a white woman, meeting my granddad as a mixed race man. He was born in the mid-20s, 1920s. They got married maybe early 50s. Obviously, I had my dad. So to hear those stories unravel, that actually started to link me with different people around Manchester of mixed heritage as well, connecting my dad's friends on Facebook and hearing stories that were just, they would have never arisen if I'd not met Suandi. So the journey and the history of not only people that are included in these stories, it's the people outside of the wider story as well that are connecting and continuing the conversation as well. So that's actually been a really beautiful thing. The boys was a really interesting one because Suandi asked me to come along, and I think it's that not quite feeling like I should be there. And when I was actually amongst the boys, obviously they were older than me, Barry, Ozzy and Steve, and I felt like I was amongst friends, but I could also sense there was a kind of, on the aesthetic, why is this guy here? Because again, to them, I'm probably just looking like a white guy. Let's just put it like that. So as we got speaking and they realized my stories, Steve actually looked at me and said, now you've mentioned this, you remind me of my son. Obviously his son's mixed race. So hearing their stories was so similar to my dad's stories. They were of a similar age, and now seeing the pictures and the resource of, you know, Barry, Steve and Ozzy, jet black tashes, jet black afros, that's exactly how my dad looked on his pictures from, you know, his childhood. And this picture here was my dad in his early 20s, and that was obviously his hair quite short, but pictures that I've got of him, his hair was huge. And I never witnessed that because he lost his hair, as obviously when I was born, he didn't have the same hair. My journey was kind of, I'd always kept my hair really short. I never knew how it would grow until I was 18. So this is a picture of me at 18 years old. And my hair just went up and out. And that was me in the world starting that path of probably anger and confusion, because people would think I was a white guy trying to perm my hair. And growing up, I was surrounded, like I was the only white person in the group. So I had a lot of black friends, a lot of mixed race friends, and a lot of people judged me on me trying to be like them. So a lot of people would think I was trying to be black. So that was something I would kind of hear a lot growing up in Manchester. And people would ask me if I perm my hair, people would try and touch my hair. So this was a real shift in my life of my physical identity changing, because I'd never grown my hair before, and I didn't think it would look like how my dad looked when he was young. So to hear the boys speak about their experiences, and it was just such a great experience, such a learning experience of hearing more stories from a time where those guys really did go through a lot when they were just in regular everyday life, just from their physical appearance. And, you know, having, you know, being mixed race to a white parent, a black parent of different cultures, they really did go through a lot. And it reminded me of the stories that my dad told me, that, you know, what he suffered growing up as well. And it was just really nice to be amongst people and feel really welcomed. But again, it's that interesting thing that I still felt that happened was, do they realize why I'm here? Because I'm now comfortable in saying, you know, I'm a mixed race person. I'm at that place now. I feel comfortable expressing that. But you still, until that is spoken, there still is that thing of people don't quite see it because it's not fully there on the appearance. So I think it's such an important thing that Suandi has included me in these discussions, because it's helped me on my journey, but it also the wider conversation of how confusing it can be on the spectrum of being mixed race. If you look at my dad's skin tone on that picture, we're not too far away from each other skin tone wise when we're next to each other. And my dad's brother, my uncle, is a lot darker in skin tone to my dad as well. So there's a great story there from Suandi with the boys, but also my own story. I just have a big thank you for her bringing me on this journey and, you know, letting me share what it's like from my experience as well.
Thank you, James. And your inclusion in the boys, I think, will really be felt by a lot of young people. We're contacted quite frequently by people who ask questions about identity and where they belong and who has the right to claim certain labels and certain identities. So I think this way of starting the conversation is really, really valuable. It will be for a lot of young people. And on that, I think this is a good point to turn to Paris now, because I believe you'll be speaking a little bit to the educational side of the resource.
Yeah, and reflecting on identity a little bit as well. So I think that builds on that. So thank you again, like everyone else, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this. Just even the opportunity of sitting with Sue Andy's archive has kind of prompted a reflection for me over the last few days and weeks and stuff as well. So I wrote down what I wanted to say because I wanted to make sure I kind of covered it all, covered my reflection. So I'll get going. So visiting the archive made me reflect deeply, and there are 3 main points that I want to touch on. That's my experience with the archive, the context of education, and the broader questions of identity. First, reading through the chapters, I was really aware that this was Sue Andy's past experiences, but I recognised a lot of parallels with my own today. And as I read through the chapters over the course of a week, I found that I was reflecting on over 30 years of growing up, going to school, and living in Manchester. Second, as an educator, I think daily about how the classroom shapes our understanding of identity. From reading about the people that Sue Andy had met or worked with over the years, I drifted back to my English GCSE class, with the teacher reading out John Agard's poem, Half Caste, and the students around me were laughing. And at the time, I didn't fully grasp the significance of that moment, but I knew that it felt off, and that there was a kind of a misrepresentation of the critical message that Agard intended. So this memory resurfaced for me as I navigated through the archive, and I think it underscored the importance of how important it is for educators to handle topics of race, identity, language, and culture in the classroom. So I recognise, I guess, that this archive can provide important context for educators to draw on the story of Em in the curriculum. But I do also hope that it provides them with awareness of the depth, nuance, and sensitivity needed to empower young people to explore these themes. So for me, this involves not only forming connections with the stories and what's written on the page, but leaning in more closely to what can be felt from those stories. And then third, I wanted to reflect on the broader question of identity, and in particular, Sue Andy's reflection on Eartha Kitt's separation of her stage self and personal self really resonated with me. And over the last couple of years, I've thought a lot about Black women in music and the broader implications of Black feminism in this space. And I guess I've found a lot of comfort in Black feminism's capacity to embrace the both and approach rather than the either or. So I guess the notion of dual identities, by choice or by necessity, can serve as a metaphor for the experience of people who are told that they are mixed race. So for me, my Jamaican self and my Irish self are equally as authentic and integral to who I am, but sometimes one of those selves is more public by choice or not. And so overall, my visit to this digital archive has prompted quite a deep reflection for me on the messages that I received about identity as a child. And it reminds me of the significance of embracing that multifaceted experience of identity in the classroom, and for us making more space for that in education. So just to end and return to the parallel between Sue Andy's experience and mine, I thought it'd be really fitting to finish with a line from her poem, The Chair. And in that, Sue Andy writes, "Mixed race, you know not half of anything, a whole beauty of Black womanhood."
Thank you, Paris. That was wonderful. That was really wonderful. And I love how there's so many intersections between what you've said, going back to James and Michael, and then all the way back to Phil at the beginning. And there's something around the generational connection and the seeing yourself, no matter where you are in your journey, which is wonderful. So we are delighted that Sue Andy is joining us now for the final part of the conversation. And this is a chance, firstly, for the panel to put some questions and reflections to Sue Andy, and then we'll open up the floor to comments and questions from the audience. So if you would like to start, audience, by typing in any questions that you might have. I do have some here that people submitted in advance. We'll work through those. But first, a chance for our panel to speak directly to Sue Andy and ask any questions and share any reflections that they might have. Michael, I see you already unmuted if you want to start.
So I've got to talk about your mum and your dad. More about your mum. Tell me more about your mum and dad's relationship. Because my dad was Nigerian, he was a Nigerian seaman. My mother was Irish little girl, and we're very similar in that sense. I'd be interested to feel how did you feel you fitted in with them or didn't?
They didn't fit in together.
Mm.
And when you think about it, it was really difficult. She and all those women, majority of those women, didn't understand where their husbands had come from and the shock of living in the UK. My dad came from a very small village. You know, he was barely literate. And he felt that the British were some the people he should look up to. Where my mother thought, look at that. You know? So there was a point of conflict. But as a couple, they didn't fit together. As parents, they were a team.
That's interesting you say that they were a team, because I guess I got that from my mum. My mum and dad working, wanting me to be the best and going up to the school to speak up for me. So that they saw the value of education and place in the world. I was interested, your dad and being British. How important was that to him, did you think? And that you should be British, you should have the values of Britain rather than Nigeria?
No, I don't think that was necessarily important to him. But we are the generation where our fathers didn't teach us their language.
Thank you. I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Because I think they didn't see the need of it. There is a train of thought that said the women stopped that happening because that would mean the children and the husband could speak and she'd be excluded. And I do know that people would visit the house, his countrymen would visit the house, and my father, and anybody Nigerian on this, please excuse me for this example, but my dad would go, I'm my wife. We'd think, oh shit, we're in trouble. I'm my daughter. Oh God, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think they felt it was important. I think the way to sum up their relationship was when my mum was dying in the hospital and my dad insisted to visit her. And he called her Peggy, and she was so annoyed because she was now Margaret. You know, she'd come up in life. Then she said, Andy, she never called him Thomas, pray for me. And my dad said, and it always makes me want to cry, I pray for you in my own language and I pray for you in English. And I thought, well, whatever crap went between them, this is my mum and dad.
And
Thank you.
we were talking before you came on about the connection that people are having with the resource and the stories you tell in there, no matter what generation you are. And there's something that speaks to everyone that they can see in there. And that's partly because of your openness.
Thank you.
And so I think I'll ask this question now that came into us because it might be the right point, which is, how hard is it for you to be so open? And is that something that's changed over the years?
When we started this, when you first invited me to do this, I had no idea what you were talking about. And how we were going to put a museum online, even though I knew the site. And we set up themes, you remember that? And I tried to write those themes, and I said one day, I can't do this. All I can do is write. So people with particularly Nigerian and Irish genes, we talk a lot. So I talked through the computer and there was no one to interrupt me, until it got over to you, sort of thing. So once I got going, I was going. Simple as that. And it's not ego. It's when you open a memory, it can flood out, and it just kind of came out. But I wanted it to be honest, because there is always somebody going to say, well, that's not true. So it had to be honest, no exaggerations. It had to be as honest as it possibly could be.
And we appreciate that. I think part of the reason why, as I said, it's only been a week. We've had so much incredible feedback already, and it really is the honesty, I think, and the vulnerability in some ways, because I think a lot of people are thinking how hard it would be to tell their story, but you carry us with your voice throughout your life work. But as we're talking about, it goes beyond that, this resource. It goes beyond you and your story. And what we've heard today is how people from different time periods and different viewpoints are connecting with that. So I could talk to Sue Andy all day, because we have done that for the last 18 months. So I'll please jump in from the panel if anyone else has any comments. Phil?
Hi, Sue Andy. One of the things that we've always in Ireland looked to the UK. As interesting listening to Michael talking about not looking to the outside for who you are. And I suppose we were always kind of envious of the fact of what appeared to be a Black community. And we didn't tend to talk about a mixed race community. We were half caste children, and we belonged in the Black community. And the Black community tended to claim us as theirs. But what we didn't have were the names. And so I am actually Mary Mullen. And so when I walk into a room, they're not expecting me. And I'm kind of working with this idea of unexpected Irishness at the moment, that when you put your name down as Mary Mullen and this walks in, there's a slight kind of take back. But you're the opposite, and so is Michael. You have your father's names, even in terms of the Africanness of it, or the non kind of Englishness of it. So you have a name that represents some kind of difference or exoticism or whatever it might have been in the minds of people when you were growing up. And I just wonder, how did that impact on you carrying those names? Because we feel at a deficit of not having our father's names. We have these Irish names that often don't sit comfortably. James is talking about phenotypically, he's not seen as belonging. So while we may fit in phenotypically, our names again are kind of, they other us in a completely different way, because they don't tend to fit with our phenotype. And I just wonder for you, having your name like Sue Andy, which is such an amazing name, how did that, impact on you as a child or as a woman going through this kind of very anglicized world?
I would say that Manchester, those who live in Manchester lived in a village, and it was called Africa. And I think that's the same for Liverpool in to a certain degree. So just never thought about it. It just never. I used to say my name's Sue Andy, not Randy, not Handy, not Bandy, because people kind of took the mickey out of it. And don't forget, we had Andy Pandy on the telly. But I just never thought about it. I want to say with the half caste, reference to the section from the boys and their sense of pride in being half caste as a generation. But I need to tell you about why I call myself Sue Andy. I call it my Madonna name. So my mum always thought she'd have blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. Didn't happen. She knew she was going to call her son Malcolm. That was easy. And the daughter she was going to call Angela. The priest who said he would baptize me when the church was empty finally said to me, Mum, if it doesn't happen this week, it's not happening. So she had to come up with a name. She went with her sister, Josie. To sum up my Auntie Josie always said the best things in life are packet of Kingston cigarettes, a glass of Guinness, and a black man. Right? So they go to the church, they have the service, and on the way out, my auntie said, "Do you know what Susan means, Margaret?" Oh, it would have been, "Oh, Peggy." My mum went, "No." She said, "It means white like a lily. So you've really messed up this time." So when I became a poet, it was a time when people taking on African names, often what they didn't know what they meant. And because you can't see my mum, I decided to bring my names together. So Sue for my mum and Andy for my father. And I really stick with that professionally more than anything. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
It's a great answer, and
Okay.
yeah, it's a privilege, I think, that we often feel the loss of, and when your identity is contested continually. And I think in my own research, several of the participants, when I was carrying it out, talked about if we had only known where we came from, who our fathers were, where it would have made a huge difference when people
Oh
told
God,
me to
yes,
go
I
back to
understand
Africa.
that. I know when I performed Story of Em in Ireland, quite often people used to say, "Isn't there a Wilkie family down the street? We could take you down." And you say, "It's okay. I don't think they want to meet me." So.
We talked before you came on quite a bit about the workshops and the educational side of things. And, it was wonderful, the work that you did, and Faith and Kevin, with the young people. And Paris was speaking particularly to that, and also James, in terms of how the resource and centering histories and identities in the classroom can be very powerful to young people. And obviously, Story of Em is on the curriculum now. It's increasingly being studied at universities. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that and what your hopes are in terms of education and what the young people will get out of the resource, both those that are studying Story of Em and those that might stumble across it by chance.
Can I say something first about the workshop? Obviously, I invited Faye and Kevin because I so much love their work. In the video, there are a pair of twins. So we'd run through the poems, we'd, done the draft, done the thing. And then I wasn't working that particular weekend, but I got the copies in. And those twins, their parents are just they've tuned those kids in so well to their heritage. And they'd written their poems, and they'd said, for Ethiopia, she is this, she is this, she is this. And I get these sheets of paper, and the she has been removed. And I thought, oh, that's really odd. And I didn't register the edits in the other poems. So when we came to filming, I said to them, "Why did you take the she out of the poetry?" And they said, "No, we didn't. Our teacher did." And I was furious. And I said, "Do you want to put it back?" And they said, "Yes." Now, whether she thought it was not feminist to have the she in there, whatever, but to edit a child's work in that way is so out of order, particularly when they're from a different culture and they're talking about their culture. So that was one thing. We saw them in education. I'm just dead proud people are studying my mum. I don't think more about it. She'd be like that. She'd be, bloody hell, that's all I think about it. And I'm grateful because it's happening, because Deirdre Osborne did that negotiation on behalf of myself, Moshi, and Lemsisi.
Yeah, I've got a two-part question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go on, James.
So I'm sure everyone will agree, when you meet Sue Andy, she carries an air of, you just have to respect her. That's how I felt when you first meet her. There's just something about her that this is a woman who you really respect. And that was an instant thing. So I wanted to ask, is that a choice of character that you carry energy-wise? And if so, what moment in your life kind of created that energy that you move through life with?
James and I met. He was my computer man, weren't he, when we first met? To be honest, James, I think it's a guard that I've learned to put up. Maya Angelou writes, "We wear the mask." And I think that was my mask, that wherever I walked into, I'm representing all Black people in my behaviour, the way I carry myself, but also to be assertive when walking into that space. I worked with the Hittite Empire, which is a 40 all-male African-American company. And when they used to fly in to Manchester Airport, you know, the plane comes really early from America. And I used to take them into Hilton for breakfast before, because you can't get into the hotel. And I can remember Keith Antel Mason saying, when you walk behind Sue Andy, it's like walking behind Princess Anne. Because I did it 4 mornings, I walked to this hotel, and 4 times somebody walked up as though they wanted to stop us. And I just kept walking. And these 6'4" Black guys behind me were kind of like, oh my God, you know. So I think it's just a guard that I can't get rid of now. And I think I know that some people find it hostile, and I don't want it to be hostile. People have said to me, I thought you were really hard when I met you. And that really upsets me. What can I say? You know, it's my survival apparatus, I suppose, in some ways. You know, but you were saving me at a time. I was working on Afro Solo when the computer was going wrong, so I was incredibly tense. And it was a joy that when I interviewed your grandmother, to find out that I went to school with your dad. That gives an age away, doesn't it? But, you know, so again, there's that village again, Phil. You know, I went to school with your dad. Your dad was best friends with my cousin, Chris. Who would have known, you know?
And my second question would be, what was the reason it's so important when you stumble across somebody like myself who, you know, acknowledges my heritage and tells you my story in as much as what I know? What's the reason that you choose to pour into somebody like myself and shed light and help them learn and grow and be a part of what you do?
I think, one, you give me too much credit. I don't think that was my intention when we met. You were, I want to say brave, and I don't mean that in a condescending way. You were brave to ask questions. And I answered those that I could answer. But I wasn't aware at the time you were on a journey. I suppose because when I realised who your dad was, I made assumptions around that. For me, having you with the other 3 guys talking that Saturday afternoon was an incredible honour. You know, the love in that room, the love towards you as a younger guy, as a light-skinned guy, was just tremendous to witness. But I think along the way, we all learned from somebody. You know, I learned a lot from the Hittite Empire, and I've learned a lot from white people as well, you know, on their journey. So we're all on this journey. Just now and again, you just have to get off and take a breather. Okay.
Paris, did you have something for Sue Andy?
Yeah, I do actually. So just for a bit of context, Sue Andy, I was reflecting on just this sense of like duality that I was getting of your past and my present, and identity and heritage, and you know, that kind of thing. So I didn't touch on it in my reflection, but as I got to the end of the exhibition and I watched the Gen Z workshops, and there was a video at the end with young people, I guess, like reciting their poetry, and there was one line that stuck with me so much, and it was from the twins, and they each turned and looked at the camera and said, when there are 2 of me, the question of who is me is so important to me. And I'm not going to lie, I was crying actually watching them read that, because I was like, wow, you know, this idea of duality has come through from a twin perspective. So just to kind of get that context, but my question to you, Sue Andy, is you've just mentioned about learning from a lot of different people as well. What did you learn from the young people in that workshop and doing that workshop with them?
That the younger generation are far more confident than we are. There's one poem from an Asian girl who likes horror stories or horror movies. You know, they weren't doing the cliche of what perhaps most people expect. They were confident, especially about their names. You know, I went to school with a Chinese girl who called herself Wendy because she didn't want people to call her by her given Chinese name. But the 2 Chinese girls in that workshop chose to change their name. because it was just easier. They weren't giving up their identity. They chose just to get through life, you know, to go with that. So I just felt they were just more confident, maybe. I think for my generation, and Michael's, because he's much older than me, I think perhaps it was a different type of battle. Would that be right? Of gaining respect in school. Yeah, maybe. Does that answer it, Paris?
It does, Sue Andy, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm sorry it made you cry, but I know what you mean.
No, I enjoyed it. I watched it twice.
Going to ask some questions from the audience now.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to ask, please do put, audience who are here today, any questions into the chat. But I'm going to ask these ones that came through to us in advance, which was, I loved finding out that you have Irish heritage. How Irish do you feel?
Have you heard me talk? That's it, isn't it? And every superstition under the book, you know, linked in with the Nigerian superstition. I mean, I wasn't brought up in an Irish kind of household, but it's there. You recognise it, and that love of all things Irish. I mean, when I worked in social work, my boss, Kieran O'Malley, we spent the whole evening on night shift just talking, telling stories, anecdotes, you know, things like that. So it's there, yeah. Yeah. Next.
Do you think Manchester's history of racial mixing has been overlooked in favour of other areas?
You mean other areas of the UK or
Other areas of the UK?
You don't know.
Yes, yeah.
I think the horrors of the Windrush and that Windrush timeline has pushed aside how long Africans have been in the country. And that's an issue for those who are bigoted and right-wing, who want to say, well, you know, you don't belong, you're not been here that long. You know, Caribbeans are into fourth generations, Africans are into seventh and eighth bloody generations. So in that sense, yes. In that sense, yeah. I mean, Paris, you did say to me, didn't you, that you didn't realise that there were older mixed race people. And I went home and I went, wow, I can't believe that, you know.
I did know they exist. Yeah, I did know they exist. I was just saying that when I notice people on the street, I notice that it's not something that I see daily. I did know you exist.
Don't say me, because I'm not in that generation. I was walking in a park one morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning. There was a black guy on a bench, 6 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, oh, should I let on to him or not? And then I thought, he might know somebody in the family. So I kind of went, morning. And he said, I knew. Heinz 57, half caste. He was a Scouser. And that thing of acknowledging of each other. You know, if I'd have walked away without speaking, that would have been horrible. That would have been horrible.
Next question. I've loved learning about your long journey. Your long journey through the arts. You seem to have met so many people and experienced so much. What would you say to people who are mixed race starting out in the arts now?
Don't say, I don't want to be seen as a black artist. I want to be seen as an artist, because it's never going to happen. You will always be a black artist. Your work will always be judged by that. It's great to have mentors across the board, but make sure one of your mentors is black. That's really important, because the nuance of our work is within our cultural history. And, you know, I've got white mentors who I love and adore, but there are some points when they cannot advise me on my work because it doesn't hit the same spot with them. So, yeah, that's what I'd say.
And you've been very honest about your own journey in the arts. I think as we have built the resource, that's one of the things that I've been really surprised by, because obviously before we started, I knew about many of the things that you'd done, but they kept coming. They kept coming, and from starting out in Black Scribe, then ending up with what's becoming, I think, a very favourite anecdote of yours about Maya Angelou, talking to Maya Angelou on the phone, driving around with Eartha Kitt, and then of course your honorary doctorates, your OBE. It's a long, I keep saying that, I mean that in a positive, it's a long and prestigious journey. And I just think it keeps coming every time. We had to keep putting more things in.
Yeah.
It's
I have to say that, and this is not modesty, I am not an amazing writer. To go back to that thing about the Irish in me, what I can do is perform. And I write the performance work I write in my head. If I write on the page, I never remember it. And I've always said I wanted my performance to feel like a gossip over the garden gate. To be there and to have it work. And I think I've written the thing when I hung out with Eartha Kitt. She did say to me, if you want to hang out with Eartha Kitt, go buy a ticket. You want to hang out with Eartha. And I remember being in Liverpool with Michael in, the pedestrian street, the main street. And she was buying bananas off a fruit stall. She was in between rehearsals. I think she was doing something with the blue coat. She had a little wool coat on and things like that. And she picked up these bananas. And then the woman said, "Is that all you need, Eartha?" And Eartha Kitt just stood and laughed and laughed. She laughed that much that we got a crowd around us. And it was that kind of like, so what is Eartha Kitt? So what? She's buying bananas. And I love that, And that's very Liverpool, isn't it? Very ordinary.
Before you came on, Phil, you'd picked up on that, hadn't you? It was you who mentioned about the Eartha Kitt anecdote. Is that right? Somebody?
That was me.
So I'm Eartha.
Yeah, Eartha did say to me, sorry, but Eartha did say to me when I first met her in the Palace Theatre in the dressing room, and I stood at the door and she threw a few questions at me, but one of the things she said to me, "Okay, they won't like you, because you're like me and you're pretty." And at the time I didn't know what she meant, but I hadn't read a life story then. And afterwards I knew what she meant, and she meant being mixed race. Next.
Well, before I return to questions that were submitted, I'd just like to read out some of the comments that we've had in the chat. Greetings, Sue. I remember witnessing an early showing of Em in Manchester. It was moving, inspiring, and encouraging to me as a mixed race sister. Thank you for the privilege of journeying with you.
I think that might be Carla. Is that Carla?
No, that's Aisha.
All right, Aisha.
Also from Marie, thank you to the panel and especially to Sue Andy. The resource you have created is wonderful, touching, warm, and authentic. The workshops with the young people were so beautiful, and what you have just said about names speaks to those sessions and the poems the young people created. That's
Marie Mollo. That's Marie from MMU that allowed us to do the workshops.
Names are so important. Thank you for all you've done. It changes lives. And I just feel like there was something really special. I mean, all the workshops that came, the outputs that came out of that have been really rich. And if you haven't already, I do encourage you to visit the workshops area of the site. I think the young people are really proud to see themselves reflected in the resource. And it was very important to us that they weren't behind the scenes as such, that they were also really shown within that. And then a comment from Vanessa. So right that Windrush responses has created unintended consequences. Even though we're born in and have been here for centuries, we are relegated to the Windrush League, thereby denying or diminishing us rights of citizenship.
When I was working on Afro Soul, I was quite shocked that a couple of my father's countrymen wouldn't let me interview them. The Windrush scandal hadn't, erupted then. And it made me realise that they felt fragile and unsure about their status. And the fact that how some of my father's friends would simply disappear. You know, you'd say, where's Mr. So-and-so? My dad would say, gone home. And there was no forewarning. They just kind of disappeared. So we will never know how many Africans, Indians, Pakistanis have been thrown out of this country. That's one thing the government, whoever's in power, is never going to tell us because they've handled the Windrush so badly.
Well, and before we were talking around documentation and how and archiving and how there is documentation, there is archiving, but it's often done by outsiders. So it's fragmented, things are omitted and things left out. And I wonder, Michael, if could bring you in on that because of the work, particularly you've done with John Blank. And if you have any thoughts around archiving and trying to piece somebody's story together from fragments.
That's a great question, that, and I'll try and be brief. I'm doing that now in the John Blank project because it's about imagining the John Blank, the Black Tudor trumpeter. And I've been doing the project for about 10 years now. I've got over 100 artists, including a great poem from Sue Andy celebrating him. But if I was doing that today, I'd start with AI, and I wonder whether I would continue. Because I'm doing some work on Nathaniel Wells. I don't know if you know Nathaniel Wells. He was the son of a plantation owner and one of his enslaved women, and he inherited the farm because he was the last surviving son, and he inherited a vast fortune, and he was educated, and he ended up he owned a huge estate in England. He was sheriff, justice of the peace, lieutenant, what a great and good. Married twice, had 20 kids, 7 of them survived. Yeah, his ancestors, we know them in Australia, were surprised to find out that he was black because there are no pictures of him, no pictures. So how do we reconstruct that pictures? And I'm using AI to kind of build a profile of him. So we can recover these images because at the end of the day, it's in our head. It's how we imagine ourselves, who we believe ourselves to be. And that's why I think that the work that Sue Andy is doing is so important because it gives people some strength of identity. I'm sorry it's turned into a polemic here, but it's because I work with young people who are confused about who they are and they're challenged by their blackness and how they fit into society. And this helps them understand who they are about themselves. And I'm thinking one particular boy, we had a young boy. One of the things we do at the start of the session, we say, stand up and say something good about yourself. Yeah. And they always struggle at this. Kids, they just got no idea. But,
That's right.
This little boy struggles, and he blurted out, I'm light-skinned. Nobody said anything. We just passed on. Even the elders, we running the class, there's nothing we could say. And afterwards, we talked to him, and it was so hard to address that boy. Now with the tools, I wish I'd had that Sue Andy side to take him to and to deconstruct who he is, how he fits into society would have helped. So that's why this work is so important, but identity, because it's in your head.
Can I say that, and all of you, have you not seen some people out and thought, that one's black? It's what I did with James. Before he told me, I knew, because you see something. And on the site, I talk about the Christian family. Well, our Elaine, I believe, looks like Sophie Loren. And I remember saying to somebody one day, she looks like Sophie Loren. And she went, what do you mean? I said, she looks like Sophie Loren. She went, but Sophie Loren's not black. Does that matter? She looks like Sophie Loren. That's a fact. But that's the old saying. And I think Lenny Henry said it best, didn't he? He said, have you got any African in you? Do you want some? You can look at families and think, ooh, somewhere in the past, there was a bit of Africa in that family. But in Liverpool, I was thinking Liverpool, you look at families and that a couple of generations back, there's been possibly a white woman who said, I don't care what colour my kids turn out, they're going to have my features. And you can see it, European features in the family of all shades going down, that someone stayed there. In the workshop, the Saturday school workshop, one young Asian boy introduced himself as, I am autistic. I know, and I let it go as we went round the room with the names. But I did go over to him afterwards and said, well, I've got cerebral palsy, but that's not who I am. Because somebody must have told him to say that as his opening introduction. The same way about being light-skinned, I don't know. Sorry, that was a bit too deep.
Well, it's a resource of deepness and richness, and that is, you know, the feedback and the conversation we've had tonight.
Thank you.
Pointing to that. So as we come to the end, I'm just going to ask one final question which came through, which was, I'll simplify it, what's next for Sue Andy?
Pudding, chips and peas. No idea. No idea. I mean, you know, when you work freelance, what comes up, isn't it? Sort of thing. It's been a very quiet number of years, to be honest. I don't know. I know I haven't got another show in me. You know, it's great and it's wonderful that people love Story of Them. I didn't write the way, you know, great writers write plays or stories. I recounted my mother's life. And when I'm taking her, I always say to the technician, she sits there, she sits. And sometimes they go, don't you play? And I go, yeah, but she sits there. It's wasn't a great writing by me. It was retelling a story that I knew. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't have another performance piece in me. Definitely not. What I write next will be probably come from an overheard conversation. That's what I usually write from. Or I read a line in a book and it resonates with me. But yeah, I love overheard conversations. They're great.
They're the best.
They are the best. People say the most amazing things. Just throwaway lines. In Marlon James, Harris, the other night. Marlon, is it called Marlon James or Marlon Phillips? I get confused. He mentioned she knew she didn't live there. Was that the line? Do you remember it? Harris isn't answering me.
No, I don't remember the line. I don't want to.
Yeah, something like that. And you because you're very good on your phone. You were going like that, and I thought to get my phone out, and
I was
I
taking
wrote it
notes.
later. But that thing about, you know, it made me think about moving to a neighbourhood and the struggle with the neighbours, like when my mother bought the house in Levenson when we weren't allowed to visit until we moved in. And then we moved in. It was an Irish family next door, Phil. And my mum worked nights. And the old lady, the grandmother lived with the family. She was lovely, but she was so nosy. And she said to my mother one night, I see you keep leaving the lights on. Is it because you never had electricity before? And you kind of go, really? You know. So that didn't answer the question, just made me think of it.
Well,
Michael's left.
Michael's left. He's gone. He's back. He's back. I'm just going to read out a couple of comments that have just come in before we wrap up.
Okay.
Rachel says, I thank you to Sue Andy for being such a natural and generous mentor, and to the Mixed Museum team for creating this resource. SussedBlackWoman is such a model. I'm looking forward to showing it to students as we think about archives and how important it is to tell life stories. I hope you're going to include the recording of this session as part of the resources. We absolutely will, Rachel, absolutely will. It might take us a few weeks to get it up and captioned, but this should definitely go in.
Can I say I coined a phrase the other night. I was talking to someone who works for English Heritage, and I coined the phrase unintentionally. The best history is gossip history. And that's the history. It doesn't come in, that's not in the books. It's a history of remembrance. You know, that's the best. And doing Afro Soul in particular, as the struggle for respect is you know, still being fought by gay and lesbian communities, is people talked about the men in the community who lived as women and raised children and just lived there. Nobody ever bothered. They knew, but nobody bothered. Acceptance was much easier, I believe, when you're in a pot and the pot isn't wealthy, but the pot through its community keeps itself warm. Michael's smiling at me. Do you know what I mean, Michael? That's sharing.
Community.
Yeah. And, you
Oh,
know,
community.
yeah. And women who, I can remember Barry George, who was in the boys section, saying that how lucky they were. And I know what he means by this, that his mother did not have to prostitute herself to raise her family. You know, they had a good father, a good parenthood. There wasn't a judgment on women who the only way they could keep the home together was to work on the streets. The pot is kept warm by the support of others, and that pot's become quite fragmented in time. There's a judgment based on how good you look and what you earn and what you wear. I mean, I put full slap on for 20 minutes today. That's, you know, that's about judgment. Sorry. Back to you, Shannon.
But within that, you know, talking about the pot and the gaps, I hope that the resource will help towards that, because we are fragmented. We're not necessarily all in communities and we're not necessarily connected. So people are searching online for things. And one of the things we try and do at the Mixed Museum is actually fill the gaps with good quality, scholarly, well-backed research that is actually, we hope, informing people, educating people, and providing a sense of connection. And that's what I've said before. We're seeing coming in from people who have access to the resource, that it is speaking to them already. So it's going to be great to see where it goes. Just before we wrap up, a last comment that's come in from Kath. Hi, Sue. I love you and I'm very proud of you. You also know that 2 of my mixed race great-grandsons are light-skinned and blonde. Recently shown family photographs, a neighbour asked me if they were of Jamaican heritage. This just confirms what you just said about you can tell. From Kath.
Yeah, that's my friend Catherine, who's Irish and has black children. And yeah, I want to say here, and I don't want to say it to embarrass, but I want to say thank you to James as well, because in a sense, you made the research worthwhile. I know you posted something on Facebook. It was completely out of the blue. And I can remember reading it and having a little weep. It didn't make me feel big-headed or anything like that. Because when I worked in Afro Solo, as I put in the application, we were already losing our fathers. And it wouldn't be long before we lost the next generation. And we buried so many guys last year. You know, one of the stages I now feel that I've performed on too often is at the front of funerals, and I've taken 2 complete funerals from start to finish. And for the kids who say, I'm proud of being light-skinned, and for James, for you to continue to live in this world as a black man, then I want to say thank you to you. Yeah?
Appreciate you.
And from myself as well, James, thank you, because again, I think your inclusion in that section on the boy, you know, all the boys, that section is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
But again, including you in there, I think will help other young people connect with the conversation and feel connected to that generational gap that there can sometimes be. And this is what seems so beautiful about the resource, that it is speaking to so many people of different ages in different places. So you know, as I wrap up now, I'll just go back to that question of what's next. And what's next for us is that we fully intend to keep working with Sue Andy. How can we not, now that we've started this? We've got lots of ideas of where the resource can go, because for us, and going back to my first point about archives and exhibitions and museums, because we're in a digital space, we really want to try and do things a bit differently. And I think often exhibitions have been very static, and once you've done it, you've done it, and then it becomes outdated and people move on and it's forgotten. And we've seen that often, you know, as we were going through Sue Andy's wonderful history of work, and then she'd suddenly say, oh, I did that. I did that. I forgot about that. Put that in. And I say, have you got any pictures? Have you got any, you know, and we sometimes struggle to find those. But we want to keep this growing. This isn't that we've done this and then we'll move on. I think all our work is about, we start a foundation and then we build on it. So for those of you who are with us in the panel, for those of you who are joining us live, and for those who may watch this at a later date, please keep things coming into us. If you find photos of you with Sue Andy, work that you've done, things that she said that's touched you, that have made a difference, we will collect all this and we will put it into the resource over time, because that's how we fill the gaps.
And don't put your photographs on Facebook. Yeah, because, you know, you're giving them away. You're giving them away. You don't know where they end up. There was somebody who was commissioned in Manchester to take some photographs of the local Black community many years ago. And one of those photographs ended up on an O-level exam paper. And the question was, talk about alcoholism in the Caribbean relating to whatever the story they were studying. And the child that saw that recognised his father in the photograph. You know, once you shove it on Facebook, it's gone. It's gone, unless you know how to lock them down, which I don't know how to do.
Well, what we've been trying to do, as we're doing with your resource, is that we're giving context. And, you know, as we talked about at the beginning, having a photo and being able to put it in its wider context can be very, very powerful. So we're going to keep building the resource, keep it growing.
Make it accessible.
We're
going to work with Maria O'Shadi, who's visually impaired, to make it fully accessible as well.
Yeah. And so we've got lots of plans. So please contact us. I'm sorry, I see some people have got their hand raised, and unfortunately we've run out of time. But do email us, get in touch afterwards and share your thoughts. For now, I'd just like to say thank you to all of you, Michael, James, Paris, Phil, Sue Andy, of course. Thank you, Miranda, for helping us out behind the scenes. And thank you to our funders, the Association of Independent Museums and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, for helping make SussedBlackWoman come into being. We really appreciate their support. Please do keep in touch with our work, both at the Mixed Museum and MBAA, who have together supported this webinar. And
can I close with what my late cousin Alan always said to us as we were leaving him? Alan always said, may your God go with you and look after you, because I can't bloody afford to. Bye.
And on that, goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.